Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Ross. It's me, and I am very excited because today Spider-Man No Way Home has officially hit theaters here in the US. I mean, it did technically yesterday on the 16th. I personally went to a 3 o'clock showing, which was pretty unprecedented. I've never been to a 3 p.m. Thursday screening, but then I even was able to go in right straight away again for round 2, thanks to a friend of mine here who was coordinating a whole big, group viewing that night too. So I definitely kind of double dipped for Spider-Man No Way Home's release, but it was so worth it because, of course, we got to talk about how not only is the greatest Spider-Man movie of all time, but one of, I guess now, my favorite movies of all time. So we're gonna start off with no spoilers, of course. I know a lot of you guys around the holiday season especially, and with how difficult it was to get those tickets that night, aren't necessarily seeing it right away, and then we'll go into some spoilers later on. But I'll be sure to make use of the chapters down below so you can see exactly where in the video the spoilers begin, and I'll have the overlay to give you the proper warning. So Spider-Man No Way Home is, like I just said, one of the best movies I have ever seen. I cannot describe to you the elation, the absolute pure joy that this movie delivers on, and this movie does deliver. Jon Watts, Marvel Studios, and Sony, and everyone involved have really delivered, in my opinion, the ultimate Spider-Man movie. I could not have asked for more. I got everything that I was hoping for watching Spider-Man No Way Home, and I think it's safe to say, and it certainly isn't a spoiler because you have the villains from the Raimiverse, of course, in the trailer. Doc Ock, Alfred Molina returning to the role, and also, of course, Willem Dafoe back as Norman Osborn, our, the iconic Green Goblin. It is a celebration of 3 generations of Spider-Man, right? And I felt really like this movie brought so much disappointment full circle and righted so many wrongs and really kind of made my inner Spider-Man fan feel whole again, right? And what just blew me away was how quickly they turned this movie around, because they were shooting it like late last year, I think into early this year if I'm not mistaken, and the post-production time to kick out a final product of this caliber, of this quality, it just blew me away. Watching Spider-Man No Way Home, it seems like a movie that they've been working on for like 3 to 4 years. And I guess technically you could make the argument that for elements of it they probably have, but oh my god. I was blown away by the performances from Tom Holland, Willem Dafoe, and Alfred Molina. I could not believe how great they were. I was kind of thinking that Alfred Molina or Willem Dafoe, at least, and probably not Willem Dafoe because that guy is a class act, but I don't really know as much about Alfred Molina, but I know that obviously it's been a long time since they filled these roles. I didn't know if they were going to have as easy of a time easing back into them, how on board they actually were, and they arguably gave better performances in No Way Home than much of their original appearances in the Raimi trilogy, and Jamie Foxx is obviously fantastic as Electro here, so much better than The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I mean, it was incredible, and of course the Lizard and Sandman were really pleasant surprises, and they were not just kicked to the side like the trailer might lead you to believe, which I really did appreciate. And what I did, like I said, really appreciate was definitely Tom Holland's performance. I mean, it's hands down his best series of performances that he has ever brought to us in the MCU thus far. Completely destroys anything that he's even done before, and the work that he did before, especially in Infinity War and Endgame and Homecoming, I honestly barely even remember Far From Home, but I do remember the final act of Far From Home being really strong for him. No Way Home, he just brought it up even more. Some of the most powerful scenes in No Way Home I'm watching and I'm like, Tom Holland, what a class act, man. He has developed into such a brilliant actor, and he really just gave everything to this movie. It takes a lot to get me to tear up in movies. It takes quite a bit. But man, there were about 3 or 4 scenes in Spider-Man No Way Home that definitely kicked me over the edge, and it's some pretty heavy-hitting stuff. So One thing that also really surprised me were the VFX, and that's kind of why I mentioned the post-production time a minute ago. The CGI in this movie is stellar. I mean, yeah, there's the, you know, usual noticeable compositing where they're not actually on a highway. You can almost just feel the blue screen behind a person, right? There's some rough compositing as usual, but it was so scarce in Spider-Man No Way Home, which I really appreciated. A lot of other Marvel releases like Shang-Chi or, you know, the Eternals, it's just, unfortunately, in your face all the time, the blue screens and the compositing, and it's not great, but in Spider-Man No Way Home it is. And to speak more on the visuals of the film, I was surprised to see that Jon Watts shot this very much unlike your usual MCU movie. I mean, sure, the sequence on the bridge with Doc Ock, with the gray and the broad daylight, very much did look like, you know, your average MCU sequence, but Doc Ock versus Peter in the Iron Spider suit just made for such an incredible fight scene that it totally distracted from that. But then the rest of the movie just looks so unique and original, and the way lighting is used in so many different scenes. I was really surprised. So I think that's really all I can say with no spoilers. Of course, Benedict Cumberbatch is in the movie as Doctor Strange, and he also offered a great performance for his screen time, and I mean, the story fully delivered for me. It really did. Everything in this movie delivered for me. And to close out the no spoiler section, Spider-Man No Way Home is a 9.5, dare I say, a damn near a 10 out of 10 for me, and I cannot wait to go see it a third time. Tonight, got another 8/10 showing to make, and then one more tomorrow after that. So yeah, if you have not seen Spider-Man No Way Home, I hope to see you back here with your thoughts afterwards. And if you have, though, let's talk about spoilers for Spider-Man No Way Home. This is your spoiler warning. If you have not seen the movie, this would be your point to click away. There are some big heavy-hitting moments, like I said, that are very important that you're going to want to see in the theater for the first time yourself. Alright, so I'll be honest, I'm a little nervous about even talking about spoilers because I almost feel like no matter what I say, without basically just talking about it at podcast length, I will never be able to cover all of the amazing, unbelievable scenes and references and performances and little details that Spider-Man No Way Home offers. So if I forget anything, I mean, just know that I loved all of it. I mean, the way that the movie opens up with Peter's identity being outed, of course, now from Mysterio immediately after Far From Home, I really loved the momentum of that scene. They did not gloss over it, and of course, you know, it's so cool seeing Peter swing through the city as everyone is immediately, you know, recognizing him and identifying him as Peter Parker. I mean, just the swinging sequences with MJ, and then, of course, J. Jonah Jameson as he continues to broadcast, and J.K. Simmons just basically narrating this movie. That was so cool and such a great role for him all throughout. He never directly meets Peter, but man, are his broadcasts throughout the film so fantastic and placed so well, and I'm just so happy to have him back as the MCU's J. Jonah Jameson. J.K. Simmons just continued to bring a fantastic new performance to that role for the modern age, and of course he is very much like an Alex Jones type with his own, you know, basically obsession-based news network, and I've got to say it really did work. I loved his inclusion. I'll be honest, I saw the leaks, and the leaks did show Charlie Cox returning as Matt Murdock, the MCU's Daredevil now. And I mean, whether or not you have seen the Netflix shows, it honestly doesn't matter, just so long as we get the main cast members back in their respective roles, because I was never going to accept anybody else as the MCU's Daredevil, and it's really good to see that I don't think Feige was going to either, and as soon as those rights finally reverted after a couple years now, we have these fantastic actors who were already so perfectly cast in the Netflix shows returning now for, I assume, a new continuity and a new future in the MCU, and let me tell you, I cannot wait for the announcement for wherever Daredevil will be appearing next, because Charlie Cox as Matt Murdock, I mean, he had some of the strongest performances I have ever seen in this genre, and some of the greatest choreography and fight sequences I've ever seen in this genre. Netflix's Daredevil still continues to hold up as just an incredible series, but obviously very gritty, very rated R, and very much not fitting for the MCU, hence why I think they will be pursuing, obviously, a new continuity, no doubt, for the MCU, maybe with just like loose mentions. But the reunion at the Sanctum Sanctorum with Benedict Cumberbatch, and you know, that was their first time meeting up since Endgame. I loved that, man. I think that it was really cool because it really kind of showed that, you know, Steven can be a little harder, right, than Tony, and I think accidentally comes across that way a lot, but he's aware of it and is trying to be better, which I appreciated. And I love the scene where they're casting the spell and Peter messes it up. That was really great and really fun. But when you get to the bridge scene and Alfred Molina returns as Doc Ock, I mean, it was so great seeing the Doc Ock arms and seeing him fight Peter in the Iron Spider suit. I mean, it was so cool, man. It was just like, wow, I'm watching the definitive Spider-Man versus Doc Ock fight sequence right now, where Alfred Molina's Doc Ock is going up against Tom Holland, the definitive Spider-Man, in the freaking Iron Spider suit, where he too has his own set of arms, of course, to contend with him. But then when Peter is just able to straight up pull up a hologram out of his gauntlet and just pair his nanotech with Doc Ock's arms and take control of them, I was like, wow. Peter just straight up, like, iPhone Bluetoothed Alfred Molina's Doc Ock arms. I thought that was incredible, man. What a great idea, and it was so fun. And then after saving the woman from MIT, and Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin emerging through the smoke before Doctor Strange teleports them into the Sanctum Sanctorum's dungeon. That was a crazy scene, and it was even crazier when we got to see more of Norman and seeing that they just kept the character so consistent from the original Spider-Man movie in 2002, and he does basically suffer from Green Goblin schizophrenia and has two different personalities, right? And the shot of Green Goblin's mask on like the dumpster or whatever, that took me off guard. That was so cinematic and just so freaking cool, albeit before you know, Norman does smash it. But I was watching that and I'm like, oh my god, man, here we go. We just got Alfred Molina, the definitive Doc Ock, back, and now here's Willem Dafoe once again in the Green Goblin suit. And you gotta understand that I think this movie just delivers on so much of what I have always felt the MCU version of Spider-Man was missing, even if we are doing it by using the multiverse and straight up bringing them in from the Raimi-verse. Listen, I grew up with the Raimi movies, and whenever there's an on-screen Spider-Man, I need Green Goblin, I need Doc Ock, and this movie, bringing them both in, just immediately scratched that itch. And it was so cool seeing Feast in the MCU version of that, and especially when suddenly Norman is there with Aunt May, and it's really kind of freaky. And at first Norman seems like he's gonna help, right? And everything's gonna be okay, and and Peter might even be able to save all of the villains, and goes through this entire mirror dimension fight with Doctor Strange, which, albeit, was probably the one scene where the blue screen compositing really did stand out to me, unfortunately, and it didn't look much better than Doctor Strange 2016, sadly, and the wig looked like it was about ready to fly off Benedict Cumberbatch's head a few times, but that's okay, because it was incredible, man. You're watching a scene with Doctor Strange, Benedict Cumberbatch, who's actually appearing in this movie fighting Spider-Man in the mirror dimension, and then Peter eventually bests him with math, and I was like, God, that is so creative and that is so cool, and I totally knew something was going to happen, because if Doctor Strange was actually in this for the rest of the movie, I mean, he would very swiftly, I think, take out the rest of the villains, and they wouldn't really be much of a challenge for him. That made a lot of sense to me, that he kind of has to dip out pretty much at the end of the second act of the movie almost, but and it's not even really the second act, it's more of like the end of the first. The movie's just, God, it has so much momentum and so many things going on. But I also love when Peter does capture Jamie Foxx's Electro, and when Hans Zimmer's I Am Electro theme from The Amazing Spider-Man 2, in my opinion, of course, the iconic Electro theme kicks in a little bit. I was like, oh my god! And I know my buddy Jake and everybody else in the theater also caught on to that, because, man, I was listening to it a lot before the movie came out. That is so incredible. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a very problematic movie, but it has some amazing stuff in it, like that theme. And even seeing Electro be blue for just a second while he's still in his electric form before, of course, re-emerging into his his normal body, which was really fun. And then Thomas Hayden Church's return as Sandman, Flint Marko from Spider-Man 3 in that scene. Dude, to protect Peter, and obviously thinking he's Toby Peter and wondering what the hell is going on, and then helping MCU Peter to stop Jamie Foxx's Electro, that was really cool. And then he's really distrusting of Peter, though, the second he realizes it's not the same one and he doesn't actually know what's going on here. And that was an interesting take, because I was kind of wondering, and I think we were all wondering watching the trailer, why is Sandman working against Peter? Because while he did find redemption with Peter again, Toby's Peter, way back in Spider-Man 3, at the end of the day, he just found out that he's been teleported to a different universe where he might be killed if he goes back and may not get to see his daughter again, and doesn't really know what's going on here or trust any of these people. He's literally in another reality, and so he's just kind of not necessarily out for himself, but making sure that he does look out for himself. And I thought that was an interesting take for sure. And I thought it was an even more interesting take how they kept him CG throughout pretty much the entire movie, up until the very end, of course, when they kind of composite in that scene from Spider-Man 3, which was a little rough, but it worked. It was okay, I understand. And it was really awesome having Rhys Ifans back as, you know, the Lizard. I always loved him as the Lizard in The Amazing Spider-Man 1. Was a little bit over the top, sure, but I thought he was a fantastic Lizard, and it was really cool to see that they brought him back and also redesigned him a little bit too. And I think that's also something that, you know, with the Amazing Spider-Man universe villains, Electro and Lizard, they redesigned the characters and just don't really address it. The Lizard does directly address Electro and say, looks like you got a makeover, right? Something like that. You know, the Lizard clearly has evolved or something, but they just kind of move on. We don't need a huge, big explanation for that. We're dealing with the multiverse here, and we don't need to ask those questions when you're dealing with infinite realities here, so it's okay. They're maybe just slightly different versions from a slightly different reality. It's totally up to interpretation. I think that's great. I just want to say before I forget how fantastic Zendaya and Jacob Batalon are in this movie, because I mean, I think Zendaya offers her best performance hands down as MJ, and yeah, Jacob Batalon is just bringing his best work, I think, as Ned since Spider-Man Homecoming here. So I thought he was great throughout the whole movie. But when Peter takes all of the villains to Happy's apartment, I have to say, that was unexpectedly hilarious, and given there was no hint to this scene at all in any promotional material, I was definitely very surprised to just see Tom Holland's Peter Parker take the most iconic Spider-Man villains just casually all into Happy's penthouse. I was like, apartment, I was like, wow. They're just casually walking through the doorway, looking at the Ring camera, and then it spritzes a little bit when Jamie Foxx walks through. I mean, this movie takes the time to talk with the villains, right? And you got a lot of that with Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin, and even a little bit with Alfred Molina's Doc Ock in the Raimi trilogy. But I mean, it's so cool the movie does stop and consider that these guys are just people, especially with Norman Osborn and Doc Ock. You know, they are just people who are being literally controlled by either another personality or another, you know, crazy mechanical apparatus with, you know, a freaking, you know, neuro implant. Max Dillon and Dr. Connors, well, they're a different case, but still. It was funny how he left the Lizard in the freaking truck. It was a really special moment when Peter fixes the neural implant and helps Otto return to his normal self while still retaining control of the arms. And then it was even cooler when the Spidey sense kicks in and detects Norman's personality change back to the Goblin. And so begins the harrowing fight through that building, literally going through floors as Electro has had enough and escapes with Sandman, and then the Lizard is helping the Goblin fight Peter, like I said, literally going down through the floors. And the choreography and the weight and the power in those strikes and those blows in that scene was incredible. And especially when, like Tom Holland said, the Spider-Man PS4 move kicks in, where he drops 2 webs down and then leaps up and then kicks him through the floor, going through multiple balconies. Dude, Dude, I caught that and I was like, oh my god, Spider-Man PS4, there's the move. I thought I would miss it, but it was so obvious when it happened. I loved it, man. That unfortunately brings us to the death of Aunt May. I was convinced by the promotional material that it was for sure gonna be Happy. And maybe Happy would not get to appear in a future Morgan Stark show or movie, and maybe he's not going to appear in Ironheart, and he's busier now, obviously, literally leading the Star Wars franchise. And it wasn't Happy. It was Aunt May. And I mean, that was a theory too, that it could be her who dies in that scene, and it was. And it was really powerful but scary and horrifying, because Willem Dafoe's performance as the Goblin, again, like I said before, was so incredible. It was genuinely more terrifying than the original movie. I think a lot of people forget that he is also kind of a super soldier in his own right? You know, with the Goblin serum enhancing his physical abilities. The Goblin is no joke. And so in that scene, when they hit the bottom floor and it's just rubble and fire and darkness, and you're stuck in a room with the Goblin, and even though she has the serum and tries to cure Norman, she does not refrain, she does not retreat. She's going to help her son and save Peter and give it her best shot no matter what. And then he brings in the glider. And I was like, oh my god. Oh my god. And then it hits. And then the pumpkin bomb after he hops on the glider, and you think, oh, Peter's gonna knock it away and she's gonna be okay. And then it's gonna be Happy who he kills on his way out. Nope. Peter is not able to get that pumpkin bomb away, and Marissa Tomei's time as Aunt May comes to an end in a scene that felt like something out of a war movie, because as Tom Holland is continuing to deliver his strongest performance yet as Peter Parker, Sony and Marvel are also faking you out and leading you to believe that she's okay. She's at least getting up, she's walking, she's talking, she's communicating, so she might make it to the hospital and be okay. And then that safety net kind of comes over you. And then she starts to slow down, then she drops, and after telling him that with great power must also come great responsibility, Aunt May dies. And that was one hell of a performance. One hell of a final performance on Marissa Tomei's part. The first scene in the movie that I did start to tear up just a bit, and then when Happy shows up, and then the cops start shooting at Peter just as the music is swelling, and it was just so cinematic and so powerful. And then thankfully they cut right to Ned's house with his mother and, of course, MJ, as Ned is now in possession of Doctor Strange's sling ring and manages to open a portal to, of course, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, who comes through, and finally, after a year of these leaks and these rumors and the constant denials in interviews, the payoff arrived. And of course we knew they were in this movie. It wasn't like that was the surprise, but it was the relief, the payoff, and the joy of seeing Andrew Garfield suited up as Spider-Man again to visit the MCU, and of course knowing then that it was gonna be okay. Listen, the Amazing Spider-Man movies meant almost just as much to me as the Raimi trilogy did, and so to have him back after being wronged so bad by Sony and having his trilogy cut short and never getting to see him face the Sinister Six or really come full circle in his universe, that really hit hard at the time, even though it was necessary to insert Spider-Man into the MCU at that time. This was the first of two very big rectifying moments for Spider-Man No Way Home, because after a really fun scene between Andrew and MJ and Ned, then of course they try again. Ned opens a second portal and Tobey Maguire steps through. And guys, the absolute joy that this scene brings, that it brought to me and everyone in the theater as everyone roared, it felt historic. It really did, and it was so special. I'm watching a scene where Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker just stepped through a portal following Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker from two movie universes that had a big impact on me as a kid, meeting face to face as they talk over each other and do the same moves to confirm that either one is a web slinger, a Peter Parker, a Spider-Man from a different world, and that was really cool. I don't think anyone's ever going to forget that scene, much like I don't think I will ever forget the imagery of J. Jonah Jameson's broadcast on a huge screen and Tom Holland's silhouette in front as the rain comes down on a very cold winter night. That was another shot that really stood out, and there were so many shots, like I said, in Spider-Man No Way Home, that distinguished this movie so much from any other MCU project, which I really appreciated. But as we get to the final act, they find Peter. First of all, them comforting Peter, because that made me really start to tear up, Ned and MJ. But when they look up, and they're the two versions of Spider-Man that are so iconic to the world from our childhoods, come down and have this powerful exchange with Tom Holland's Peter as they remember Uncle Ben and the line of, with great power comes great responsibility, and all three of them offering such great performances, and especially Andrew as he remembers Gwen and gives us new information that even after The Amazing Spider-Man 2, when he put the suit back on, he became bitter and stopped pulling his punches and doesn't want Tom Holland's Peter to end up the same way. That was really strong, and a really cool detail that they added in, that Andrew Garfield's Peter wasn't really the same after the loss of Gwen. That was an interesting addition that I just so appreciated, and I so appreciated the scene because I couldn't believe I was watching the scene. And of course, the lab scene was so fun. I mean, whether it was them confusing Peter's, which was great, or asking about Tobey's natural webs that come out of him, or of course, you know, the youth pastor line as they come up with a plan to cure the villains, and Andrew Garfield quickly remarking, I cured Connors once, I can do it again. And that's paraphrased, but it was great because it's like the swagger of Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man not really jiving with Tobey or Tom Holland's Peter. Oh my god, just so well done, just written so well, and I loved it. It was just such a magical scene. Every second of it, I'm like, oh my god. Tobey Maguire is in the same room as Andrew Garfield, and they're both playing their versions of Spider-Man. I'm like, this is real. And it meant so much, man. But when they finally get to the Statue of Liberty, and Peter gives his message to the world through J. Jonah Jameson's show, as the villains finally assemble, I was laughing because the Andrew Garfield leaks were real. And you're literally watching those leaks unfold before your very eyes. Now, not just with the blue screen, but with the background edited in. That was very funny to me. And finally finding out what the hell Andrew Garfield was saying. But more so than that, it was more of those smaller moments of Tobey's Peter making sure that Andrew's Peter doesn't talk down on himself anymore and reinforces that he is amazing, or Andrew's Peter helping Tobey with his back, or pressing more on Tobey's organic webs. Just so many small, special, and really magical moments in just each scene that I will never forget, and that just made for, again, just pure joy. And as the villains arrive and the whole sequence plays out, as you're watching all three versions of Spider-Man swing around and fight the Sinister Five, that was unbelievable. And when things start to go south and they regroup to establish that they don't really work too well on a team, but then Tom Holland's Peter's like, well, I worked on a team, I was with the Avengers, and Tobey's like, that's great, what is that? But then when they're all like, okay, they come up with which Peter's who, Tom Holland, Peter 1, Tobey Maguire, Peter 2, and then Andrew Garfield, Peter 3. I love it, man. I love it so much. It was so fantastic. And when they all run off the scaffolding and swing off together for the big money shot, where it's all three of them for a second confronting the villains, I just loved it, man. It was so funny getting to see and find out each individual shot that they were edited out from. And of course the lizard gets through the portal that Ned is trying to close, and it was so cool seeing Tom Holland's Peter fighting the lizard before, of course, Ned and MJ kind of get dragged into the whole thing, and MJ winds up falling. And our theories were correct. Green Goblin swoops in with just a stunning shot of his glider as he knocks Tom Holland's Peter out of the way, and Andrew Garfield swoops down to save MJ from falling to her death. What he was unable to do for Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy. That, I think, was the first scene where the tears actually really did start to well up, man. That hit really, really hard. God, this video has gone on for so long already. There was just so much to talk about. It's like Endgame in that way, but the final fight against the remaining villains was amazing. It was excellent and so satisfying and thrilling. And finally when Doc Ock shows up and totally fakes out Electro before diffusing his powers with that device that Tom Holland's Peter did create, that was really cool. And then of course, by this point, Doctor Strange had already showed up and re-entered the mix, and Ned and MJ made it very clear and showed him once Tom Holland's Peter was curing the lizard, and Rhys Ifans', Kirk Connors was returning back to his normal human form. That was really great too, even if he also apparently looked like he had to be composited in from the original Amazing Spider-Man movie. That's okay, it's understandable. Maybe he couldn't be in it for travel restrictions or whatever. But it's when Doctor Strange is finally about to end it and send them all back definitively after they cure everybody except the Goblin, and that pumpkin bomb, when that got thrown in the mix, that was really cool. Never did I think I would be watching a scene where Tom Holland's Peter is standing there with Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Doctor Strange as Willem Dafoe tosses a pumpkin bomb at Doctor Strange. I mean, this is a real movie that we're watching here. They actually did this, achieved this, pulled this off. And the final fight between Tom Holland's Peter and the Green Goblin, as Peter just immediately locks eyes, zones in, and enters this state, and they have a wild fight with incredible music and just incredible atmosphere, amazing lighting, and I'm watching like this event film with this unbelievably powerful final fight that culminates in Tobey grabbing the glider and stopping Tom Holland's Peter from impaling the Green Goblin before Tobey is ultimately stabbed, just like Harry Osborn of his universe was by Venom. Oh, and speaking of which, I love the Venom references and the Thanos references and Tobey's shock that Tom Holland's Peter did all those things. The crowd's reaction when he got stabbed, it was just anguish. Of shock and immediate anguish, and I was ready to accept it. I thought that Tobey's Peter might die in this movie, and that would be the big final sacrifice. Really glad that it didn't happen. I think Aunt May was enough for one movie, and I was really happy when Andrew tossed the cure to him, and then Peter was able to control himself and cure Norman Osborn, as he did finally return to his normal self and immediately expressing just absolute regret for what the Goblin had done. As the movie begins to wrap up and the multiverse cracks open above them, Doctor Strange doing his best to cast as many spells to mend the cracks in reality as different people and who know Peter Parker, one of them even seeming like they have a staff, or one of them maybe even being like a version of the Rhino, it looked like, possibly coming through. You think it's all over, but then this already amazingly powerful cinematic masterpiece of a movie hits you with the final spell where the whole world has to forget who Peter Parker is including Doctor Strange, who's casting the spell, MJ, and Ned. He goes down there, says his final goodbyes. Those final moments with MJ and Ned, holy shit, man. That got me too. And when he returns back to her coffee shop, and they don't know who he is anymore. And I can't really even describe that coffee shop scene with Peter and MJ. It was just so, it was just still so reassuring and so special and just done with such taste. And he's alone in this world, starting anew, without an Iron Spider suit, no longer relying on the Avengers or even knowing Happy Hogan, as Happy doesn't remember him either at Aunt May's grave. And it's not like they're cold toward him or anything. They could obviously rekindle and become new friends again. It's so bizarre watching Peter basically be like a ghost to Happy. God, man, when the movie does wrap up and you get that scene of Peter entering his new apartment, sewing his new classic costume with the metallic blue now and the classic red and blue again, swinging through New York, having seen more than any other on-screen Spider-Man has before, experiencing the craziest the MCU had to offer. He starts back at Spidey 101, basically Spider-Man's square one. It's just him. Nobody knows he's Spider-Man. And he's starting with a clean slate as he swings through New York, once again as our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. To go back 1 second to Tobey and Andrew's goodbye, when Peter's just at a loss for words and is just thanking them and doesn't know what to say to them, it felt like closing the book on our childhoods. And as they faded away and had that final moment, you're in so much pain, aren't you? I am. And they fade away back to their worlds. We finally have all these wrongs righted and are able to close the book on their time as Spider-Man and the gifts that they gave us as kids. I was crying for that too, a little bit. I cannot believe how much this movie achieved. That Marvel Studios and Sony and John Watts and his crew and everyone involved with this production managed to make all of this happen and created the best Spider-Man movie of all time that, much like Into the Spider-Verse, celebrates everything that Spider-Man is and everything that Peter Parker is. The mid-credits scene with Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock, of course, and Venom trying to figure out as much as he can from this bartender, I think, and wherever he was in the MCU following that Venom Let There Be Carnage credit scene. That was really fun. I can't wait for that symbiote to make its way to New York inevitably and confront Peter in the next installment of the Spider-Man saga that will hopefully include Miles Morales, as Electro kind of referenced at the end of the final act. I think the future is very bright still for Spider-Man in the MCU, even if Tom Holland needs a break for a few years. And I can't wait to see where all of this takes us, and Charlie Cox's Daredevil eventually, I assume, go toe-to-toe with Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin in the future, and of course the Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness final credit scene teaser trailer was also amazing, and that's a discussion for another time. But God, I can't wait for that movie. What they showed us looks incredible. Spider-Man No Way Home is up there now as one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time. Right up there with Revenge of the Sith, The Dark Knight, Avengers Infinity War. I would put Spider-Man No Way Home right there with them. And what did you guys think of Spider-Man No Way Home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. I know this is a really long video and a really long discussion, but I thought it was worth it. So I'm gonna go see it again. I've got another showing to catch in a few hours, like I said at the start, and I'm very excited to continue my project and all of my custom minifigures to celebrate Spider-Man No Way Home.